you. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we have assembled together to mark the 27th year of the International Day for Biological Diversity. We are also going to kickstart a biodiversity trail today, which will culminate in the World Environment Day on June 5th. On behalf of Haritgram, the Environment Society of Shahid Bhagat Singh College, I am delighted to I welcome you all, and I am also delighted to announce that we have amongst us our distinguished guest, Mr. Vijay Dhasmana. Welcome, sir. Also joining us today are our patron and principal, Dr. Anil Sardana, our staff advisor, Dr. V.A.V. Raman, Madam Jyoti Varshni, Madam Shikha Gupta, esteemed colleagues from Shahid Bhagat Singh College and various other institutions, and young students from different parts of the country. I welcome all of you to today's webinar. This year, when the world is dealing with a pandemic and we are forced to stay home, the theme for this year's International Day for World Biodiversity, which is, and I quote, our solutions are in nature, becomes all the more resounding. Yes, nature is calling out to us. However, a $1 trillion question still remains, which we strive to ponder upon through our initiatives at Haritgram. Are we listening? In line with our relentless efforts to get our fellow Indians and hopefully also the world talking about and also working constructively towards environmental conservation and restoration of nature, we have with us Mr. Dhasmana. Mr. Vijay Dhasmana is an eminent ecologist who has played an instrumental role in rewilding around 380 acres of wasteland in the site which is part of the Aravalli range on the edge of the Millennium City, Gurgaon. He has been at the forefront of I Am Gurgaon project, a citizen-driven initiative to restore the long-lost greenery due to mining and other activities in the Aravallis. He prefers calling himself an ecological gardener, but his actions prove that he is no less than an ecological warrior and a real-time hero. A hearty welcome to you, sir. The convener of Haritgram, Madam Meeta Hussain, could not join us today because of her ill health, but she has sent across her best wishes for today's session. So, I request the staff advisor of Haritgram, Dr. V.A.V. Raman, to give the opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Komal. I welcome you all to this session, inaugural session of the Biodiversity Trail. Haritgram was formed through a set of environmental enthusiasts in 2012. It's a society, environmental society of Shahid Bhagat Singh College. And over the years, we have organized many events, particularly two major events which we regularly organize is the Haritgram Model United Nations Environment Assembly, which is a replication of what the United Nations Environment Assembly regularly every 2 years have their session. Similarly, we have what we call the Delhi University Sustainability Forum, a conference for the young environmental enthusiasts every 2 years. Haritgram has organized many events, and among one of them is this Biodiversity Trail. The Biodiversity Trail was decided to be celebrated from today, the International Day of Biological Diversity, to the World Environment Day on June 5th, when the World Environment Day focal theme is also on biodiversity. During this trail, the students have planned to have around 7 events, of which 5 will be held in the similar fashion of a webinar, and 2 events will be with submission of the entries online. All this has been through the Haritgram website, and if the students go into the, as they visit the website, the whole details of the biodiversity trail comes to the idea. Alternate day, they are having 5 events, namely the online presentation competition, the online quiz, the biodiversity in 60 seconds, just a minute competition, an online crossword competition, a doodling competition, and a literary writing and an online photography. So these series of events are going to be held till June 5th. And on June 5th, we'll be having the day of action, a meeting in which we'll be having a panel discussion among different environmentalists who is going to tell us for the next 1 year how they are going to visualize taking care of the biodiversity. Thank you. Over to Komal.
Thank you, sir. Now I request our principal, Dr. Anil Sardana, to give his welcome address. Over to you, sir.
Dr. Raman, in absentia, Dr. Mita Hussain, she is not well, but she has been a force behind these activities, senior teachers in the college, and guest for today, Mr. Vijay Dasmana. Actually, after hearing and reading about the mails which have been coming to me, I always felt that it would have been better had we done this event in the college face to face. It would have been a great opportunity to meet a person like you who has assisted in reforesting 380 acres in the era when people are trying to deforest and cut the trees and disturb the environment. Finding a person like you is really finding a God-sent person who has been given a work to do this. I am really thankful to you that you have spared time to educate our students and share with our faculty the knowledge and the richness and many things which they will be learning about saving the environment. I'm very happy that Haritkram is doing these activities. They have been doing all the time, and the teachers who are involved, they are really very committed and dedicated. So are the students. I was going through the poster which has been circulated to the different colleges, and I can see that how they have arranged and engaged the young minds into positive endeavors, and they will be not only learning, but they will be also enjoying and playing the various activities they are performing. I'm very happy, very, very happy with the students as well as the teachers, particularly the young teachers. I can see Komal and others also there who are supporting this. I'm sure with your activities and contributions, this college will definitely gain much, much better and will move to a better level of excellence and a kind of understanding and commitment that we will be working for the environment, we will be working for biodiversity, we will be saving the planet, we will be saving the resources, and I have been seeing this in various activities of Haritkram and the teachers and the students who are involved with this. My best wishes to the Haritkram. Once again, I welcome Mr. Vijay Dasmana from the core of my heart. I'm very happy, and it will be delightful to listen to you, and so will be so to all of you. I'm very happy and delighted that the initiative taken by Dr. Poonam Sharma has really brought good results, and people, Department of Geography and the societies and few others are really making use of taking this Zoom license, and this should be continued. And there are no problem of resources as such. Definitely anyway, because the time is going to be there when we will be exchanging our knowledge and our skills through these means only, whether it is WebEx or whether it is Zoom or Google Meet. So our college and our teachers should specialize in these things. With these words, not coming in between the illustrious speaker, Vijay Dasmana, who is going to speak about a really relevant and current topic, I once again welcome you and thank Dr. Raman and team for organizing this program. Thank you very much. Enjoy your talk, and I am there with you, and I will be also enriched because of this talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sardana. Now, without making our participants wait further, I request our guest to take over and start with this address. But just one note for all the participants, you can type in your questions in the chat box, and we'll take all the questions after Mr. Dasmana is done speaking, and we'll definitely try to take everyone. So just type in your questions in the chat box when you hear Mr. Dasmana speak. Okay, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Let me start with Dr. Raman for inviting me to this gathering. I'm very, very thankful. He came up with this title, Thou and Me. It is a little overwhelming, but Somewhere Dhau is a lovely tree, beautiful tree of the Aravali's, and it does, I mean, we do take inspiration from this particular tree. Thank you, Dr. Sardana, for being generous with your words in terms of the work we have done. And it's very kind of you for inviting people who are out of the academia. Thank you, Dr. Komal and Dr. Varshney. And welcome everybody whom I can't see, but I know there is substantial number of students who are here wanting to listen a story of a city, which is a new city, which is emerging as a millennium city. Sorry, something has happened. Can you see my slides now? Okay, so yeah, so basically, it's more of a love affair actually. It's an affair with the wilderness. It's a you know, I have been fascinated by wild part of our country, the forests, the jungles, the wildlife, the beauty that you see in this country, you know, in its landscape, in its dry landscapes, arid landscapes, semi-arid landscapes, its forests, which are rich with biodiversity. And it's such an honor to talk to you all on this occasion of Biodiversity Day about biodiversity. I think myself as a small soldier in this whole fight to conserve the biodiversity. Unfortunately, we are losing our biodiversity at a very, very great pace. And it's the human agency which has kind of put all this biological diversity at risk. And we might be heading towards the 6th extinction, who knows? Well, you know, there's so much to talk about the biodiversity that we have around. But what I want to do is talk to you about a story of few people, of a group of citizens in this country, in a city very close to Delhi, who resolved to do something different in their city. So if you look at this slide, can you see the slide? And I would request all the participants to tell me which city it is to them. Can you please type? Okay. If you can type, what city according to you is this? Okay, I don't think people have responded, but it's okay. So this is Gurgaon or Gurugram now. So this is Gurugram in its nightlife, full of light, glitter, multi-storied buildings, you know, so much concrete. It creates its own thermal island effect. And yet it is an inspirational inspirational place for young people to go and work. It represents something new for us as civilization. And it is interesting that this is also Gurugram. This is also the same city, the most polluted city in the world. This is a Greenpeace study which they did which they published in 2019, which declared Gurugram as the most polluted city in the world. So on one hand, we have this glittering, you know, full of light, multi-storied building, and other, we have this most polluted tag. So this is a list of 10 cities, and you can see of which we have 7 in India. 7 in India, and Gurgaon tops the list. Now, another important fact about Gurgaon is that its groundwater is depleting at a rapid pace. You know, this headlines says it all, you know. Gurgaon is facing huge acute shortage of water, and all the means are used to get the water to Gurgaon. So you'll find on the Gurgaon roads, a lot of tankers are rushing around, ferrying water for the multi-storied buildings, for the offices. Now look at this map of Haryana. Now Haryana is a very interesting state. It's mostly agrarian state. So if you look, there is hardly any forest in this state. A little bit on the north, if you can see my cursor, this is the Shivaliks. If you know, Shivaliks are next to the Himalayas. And so you get little patches of forest here. And then there is small patch here, which is a discontinuous patch, but almost a linear patch that you can see. This is in the southern part of Haryana. This is the Aravallis. Now, let me tell you something about Aravallis. This is little statistics about Haryana. If you look at the true forest, it's interesting how the true forest is so little. We have less than 1% of true forest. When you say true forest, which means that it is not cultivated by humans. It's not grown by humans. It's not agroforestry. It is not plantation. It is beyond that. It is what existed already. So if you do a Google search and look for forest in Gurgaon, you will come with this result. We did not find any result for forest in Gurgaon, which is sad, which is really sad. But it's also revealing that what we need to do. You have to acknowledge what has gone wrong. What are the steps you have to take? I won't go into this, but let's go back into Gurgaon. Now, Gurgaon, with this glitter and gold in the form of money that it generates for Haryana, for India, is huge. Now, all this comes at a huge cost. It comes at a huge environmental cost. It comes at a huge biodiversity cost. While Gurgaon was establishing itself, it was taking over the agricultural fields, it was taking over the wilderness, it was taking up, all the different niches of biodiversities were taken over to build this. As well as the resources that these buildings, what are they made up of? They are made up of concrete. And concrete is what? Concrete is cement mixed with sand, mixed with this small pebbles or grits. Now, this sand comes from the rivers. This sand also comes from Aravallis. There is particular quartzite sand, which is used in construction. And there is grit. Grit is a small size pebbles, which is mainly quartzite in our area, which is, mined and then broken down by stone crushers and then sold in the market to Delhi, to Faridabad, to Gurgaon, to Noida for building work, So all the columns in these buildings are made up of those. All the beams that you see in these buildings are made up of those, So it is not just the city which kind of takes away the resources. The resources are far-fetched, going all the way to Gaggar, to Yamuna bed, to Aravalli range, A lot of stone also comes from Rajasthan. So this is a common site. This is a common site all on the way when you drive from Delhi to Jaipur. I mean, it's very unfortunate. It's really, really sad when you look at hills like this, For the first time when I saw it, I was wondering, like, what is it? What has gone wrong, But when I looked at the stone crushers underneath, and I was amazed how cruel we can be, It's a visual, it's a very violent image. It kind of evokes pity, as to what we are doing to the natural world around us, And this is a hill which is right on the expressway where we are eating up the jungles from this hill and then taking the rocks out. In fact, if you have heard last year, Supreme Court kind of pulled the ears of Rajasthan government and kind of they got the chief secretary to the court and they said, where are the 115 hills that are missing from your data? Can you imagine 115 hills have disappeared illegally on the way, in the northern Aravallis, and government has no clue, no records, no file to show. So this is the state of Aravallis, And of course, there is you can see there is dust pollution that happens. the water gathering capacity of the hills, of the jungles, just goes for a toss, because now if rain falls on this, what will happen? It will just run off, taking all the sediments down and settle somewhere down. So this is a little bit of statistics: 60,000 hectare of Aravali's in Mewat, Gurgaon, and Faridabad. 4,100 hectare, 4,100 hectare is a huge land. It was mined in 2011. So this is, you can see trucks lined up. Even today, you can see on the highway, there are trucks after trucks that come with the building material. This is not to denigrate that we don't need material. We do need material, but we have to be judicious. We have to be careful. We have to be concerned. Plus, we have to be protecting what we consider as heritage, as biodiversity-rich hotspots. Now, another thing that has happened to Aravali is that our soaring population and our ability to have resources. This is what you see, that people are coming to the corners of the hills and building houses or commercial complexes. Now here, what I'm going to tell you about, and I'll leave more time for question and answer so that we have a good discussion post this, is a story of few citizens who came together in Gurgaon around 2009 and 10, and who kind of motivated the government that they should make this mining site into a biodiversity park. So these people were, they were not natives of Haryana. They had come from different parts of either Haryana or Delhi, but kind of owned this city. They kind of took the ownership, and that's what is so endearing about it, that where you take responsibility, like your household, you take responsibility for your household. So you do everything that is required to, make it a good place. So they took ownership of this place of Gurgaon and committed themselves that they want to make this place a beautiful place. So the group is called I Am Gurgaon. There were 3 ladies who started it, and there are many, many volunteers who joined in, and the core group became bigger. Then you had Preeti, Nidhi, Swanzal, Latika, many others who kind of created this core body, I Am Gurgaon. So if you look at the park, which is a 380-acre mine site, this is a Google map, and on the left is city kind of closing into the wilderness, and that's where you get the flatlands, and beyond that is all the hilly terrain of the Aravali. And let me tell you, or maybe I'll tell a little bit later on Aravali itself, but on the right is Delhi, and this is the Rajokri forest of Delhi. Now, if you, in Google, you can't make out as to what this is, but this is a Prosopis juliflora forest. Now, what is Prosopis juliflora? Prosopis juliflora is a plant that it's also called Mexican mesquite. It was brought in by the British around 1880 and to rewild the patches of Central Ridge. Central Ridge, I'm sure you have been to Central Ridge areas, whether it is Rashtrapati Bhavan or... So if you look here, in relation to the city, you can see how the place is so tiny. But if you look, there is from here all the way down, this is a wilderness patch. And this is what the Aravalis are. And this goes into the north and here all the way into Rajokri forest. And then it used to connect all the way to the southern ridge and to the central ridge once upon a time. So, so that's Prosopis juliflora, which was brought in by British around 1880 to wild the Central Ridge. But nobody knew that it will become invasive. So now we have a term called alien invasive species or invasive alien species, IAS. Now these are the species that have colonized lands that they were not originally from, like our famous neem. Neem is it's a very, very important plant in our subcontinent. It is revered by us, but it's a IAS in Australia. It's an IAS. IAS is invasive alien species in America, parts of America. It creates havoc there. Similarly, this Prosopis juliflora kind of when it came into India, it suddenly made ground into the various landscapes of India and became invasive. And the detrimental effect of Prosopis juliflora we got to know much later, because slowly you could see that things were greening up because this plant was greening and it was kind of colonizing new lands, but it was coming at the cost of local biodiversity. It was coming up at the cost of different flora that used to exist there, even fauna, because nothing eats it. Nothing actually eats it. Now, after 100 years or more than 100 years of adaptation, you can see that nilgai and some more herbivores are eating the pods of this particular plant. And that's how nature takes its course. But coming back to the story of the park, it was a stone crushing zone. It was a mining site. And the stone crushing, you can see 8 stone crushers here. Can you imagine 8 stone crushers in small patch of land running, churning stones for development? Now this is the mined site, if you can see, and you can see the slabs. These are beautiful slabs for any geologist to examine as to how these hills were constructed. If you let me recall you, Aravali's are the oldest fold mountains in the world. You know, they are about 3 billion years old. You know, that's very old. You know, so the layers of Aravali's are, first you have a craton layer, which is the banded gneissic complex, of which the Indian subcontinent is made up of. You know, and then on top of that is a sandstone, which is very old sandstone in Aravali. And this sandstone is perhaps about 2 billion years old, which tells you the story of the land itself, that this land was under ocean, in a shallow, you know, you had shallow ocean. And then on top of it, it's quartzite. And quartzite is nothing but the sandstone which has been cooked or under heat and pressure. The sand grains, they transform from grains to crystallized form, and therefore metamorphic rock of quartzite. I'll go into it a little later, but you can see clear slabs of sandstone. And I firmly believe, I'm not a geologist, but I firmly believe that in order to understand the biodiversity, in order to understand the plant life, you have to dig deep and understand the whole soil structure. So this is what was happening when initial surveys were done. This is what was there: Prosopis juliflora, little bit of saccharum, sometimes caesium, sometimes arc, sometimes seasonal vegetation, but mostly Prosopis juliflora, the Vilaiti kikar I was talking about, the Mexican mesquite I was talking about. So please don't get confused when I'm going to use Vilaiti kikar, Prosopis juliflora, or Mexican mesquite. No, they all three are one single species. So this was the terrain in 2010. This is what IIM Gurgaon saw and wanted to convert into a forest, convert into a city park. And here, let me help you to interpret this. This is the Prosopis juliflora again. There is another small chunk here, here, here. You know, many places Prosopis juliflora is coming up. And this is a mine site. You can see how this was mined. And these are not natural rock formations. So in 2010, IIM Gurgaon gave designs to specifically Atal Kapoor, who is no more with us. He was the architect who spotted this land and who kind of galvanized the team of IIM Gurgaon to do something about this land. And he gave design for the pathways to be made in the park. And these are the construction of pathway. This is around 2010. Then a beautiful boundary wall came, of course, signature Atal style of Gabion wall, using the local material. And see, you can see that that's a truck would go up and then dump the stones, and that will be crushed down there. And then another truck will pick up the crushed material, or a JCB would fill a truck. This is the terrain. This is how the terrain was in 2010, when the chief minister came and wanted to inaugurate the park to be declared as a biodiversity park. So you can see in terms of vegetation, there is few standing Prosopis juliflora. There is another species called Acacia tortilis, which is again an IAS from North Africa, invasive species from North Africa. So there were detailed drawings that were made and different ideas were floated. And the planting work was given to agency called Haryana Forest Corporation. Now you can see Gurgaon city with its multi-story buildings, and in the foreground is the Aravali Biodiversity Park. With 2 years of protection, this is 2011 picture, and you can see with 2 years of protection, you can start seeing little bit of shrub species coming up. This is Ziziphus or the Jhad Bear. It's very delicious bear that comes out of it. And then there are different other, there is Jungli Karonda, there is Caparis Cyperia, Heath it's called. Then you can see the grasses coming up, yeah? Just 2 years of protection. Now, IIM Gurgaon came up with this massive idea. Let's plant this whole area, 380 acres, with 1 million trees. Now, this is a very, very, it's a very, what is it called? It's a, for any advertising fellow, this would be a great idea. Let's do 1 billion trees, 1 million trees, and all of that. Now, when they got in touch with me, and they got in touch with me through somebody called Pradeep Krishan, who has done a book on on trees of Delhi, and then jungle trees of Central India, and he recommended my name that I should be part of the team in looking at the planting of the Aravali Biodiversity Park. So when I saw their design and when I learned about this 1 million trees, I'm not very convinced with this idea of 1 million trees. For me, I think it is very important to create habitat. You know, our number game of million and billions is very anthropogenic. It's very anthrocentric. It is human-centric. Why we are doing 1 million trees? Because to put trees is good. But why is it good? Because it gives us carbon dioxide, because it gives us timber, because it reduces the ambient temperature, because it provides moisture regime. You know, all of this, of course, it will help the ecology as well, but it is all human-centric. But when you do a habitat, when you say that you are doing a habitat, when you're creating a habitat, you are thinking about the biodiversity, you're thinking about the life that exists there, whether it is the faunal life, animal life, whether it is the bird life, whether it is the human life, whether it is insects, butterflies, you know, amphibians, reptiles. There is so much drama that goes on in making of, when you do a habitat. Of course, you are planting trees, but you are planting trees, shrubs, climbers, grasses, epiphytes. You know, epiphytes have their own role in the habitat. So kind of we debated in the team of IIM Gurgaon that, you know, while we do 1 million trees, which is itself is a good idea to do, but in the biodiversity park, let's restrict, or let's kind of focus into creating wilderness, creating, you know, what should Gurgaon be proud of? Gurgaon, which represents taking away exploitation of resources, exploitation of forests around it, you know, directly or indirectly. I think it is very, very important, or we collectively thought it was very important that we make a statement from this 380 acres and do a reverse engineering where we kind of build a new paradigm for the citizens and for the city to think differently. And we came up with this idea that let's bring the forest that we have lost to the mining, to the development, to the human agency, human greed. Let's bring back those forests into this landscape. And those forests were the Aravali forests. So from that, we changed the whole design, and we kind of came up with this, that we are reviving a forest. And I think for me, particularly, this is the biggest shift, because here we made a statement. I think this is a very important I'm sure in future, you all will be doing something similar or great work when it comes to ecology or biodiversity or redeveloping lands. I think creating forests, creating habitats is very, very important. And it is important that we realize that, you know, forests are the reservoirs for us, for inspiration, for us to kind of look at life differently, you know, not just from consumptive, that this is for us to be consumed, but from inspiration, from seeing the quality of life. And with that, we came to the vision of the park. And the vision was simple, that it will become a city forest, showcasing the flora of Northern Aravallis. Now, Northern Aravallis are, if I give you an example, Sariska is Northern Aravalli. Up to Jaipur, it's Northern Aravalli. So the best of the forest that you find up to Jaipur was what we are trying to get back. And there are not just one forest, there are many kinds of forests that you get in these terrains, and I'll go into it a little later. So that was the main vision of the park. And then no wilderness. I mean, I'm going to emphasize this, that no wilderness in this country can be saved unless it has a particular relationship with the humankind. If Sariska or if Ranthambore or if Corbett has no relationship with humans, nobody will have the agency or the will to protect them. We have a relationship with Ranthambore, we have a relationship with Corbett, whether it is tourism, whether it is you know, the pride that we carry, that we are the nation which has maximum number of tigers, whether it's the livelihoods of the people who run resorts there, are guides there, or homestays there, or there are so many other people who are volunteers who are dependent on them. So there is livelihood, but there is a relationship. So humans have to have that relationship with the wilderness, and that we had to kind of create in this new space. If we were going to declare it as a forest, we had to have that relationship with this forest. As to how are the humans going to use it? Then third was the groundwater recharge. Gurgaon, as I mentioned to you earlier, you know, the groundwater situation is dire. It's really dire. You know, every year we are losing close to 5 meters. If you are looking at the you know, soil, if you do cross section of the soil, 5 meter column of water gets depleted every year, which is really sad, which is really bad. So this area, which is about 160 hectare, is recharging close to 30 crore liter of water every year. Now, going back to Aravallis, what are Aravallis? This is, you can see Sariska, and this is from the space how Aravallis look. They are the fold mountains. Fold mountains are simple. When the two tectonic plates meet, you know, and there is a uprising of the landmass, that's called a mountain. And in this case, it was the two tectonic plates met, and when Indian plate went under the Eurasian plate, Tibetan plate, some of the Aravallis got disappeared. According to geologists, Aravallis extend all the way from under the Mount Kailash, all the way to Gujarat. So these are the districts where you have Aravallis, Aravalli fold mountains. They had very good biodiversity at one point of time. You have Ranthambore, you have Kumbhalgarh, you have Mount Abu forests, you have, you know, and good diversity of species. Easily you will get about 600 to 700 species of plants. Plus you have tigers, leopards, sloth bears, flying squirrels, nilgais, to cheetahs, to sambars, to chosanga, to caracal, to, you know, many other species of animals. Now, just to give you a profile of Aravallis, on the extreme right, there you see a black rock here, and that's the BGC, Banded Gneissic Complex, and which is the base of the whole Indian Peninsula. On top of that is the sandstone. This is the sandstone which tells us the story of the whole Aravallis underwater. So all the sandstones largely are made under oceans, yeah. And then on top of it, this column is of quartzite, which is sandstone. When it undergoes pressure and heat, it becomes quartzite. But if you look at the flora also changes. In the valleys here, you can see a clearly different flora than to what you see on top of that sandstone, than to what you see on the hills of the Sariska Tiger Reserve. You know, so there is a lot to learn about the diversity that exists within a given geographical area. You know, if we are talking about maybe 2 square kilometers here, and in 2 square kilometers, you can see there are different strata structures of vegetation here. Now, very close to us, this is, can you imagine, this is so close. I mean, where you are sitting in Delhi, it is aerial distance would be about 20 kilometers. This is 20 kilometers from Delhi, called Mangarbani, a sacred forest, which is protected by Godariya Das Baba, whose ashram is this. He took, there was a small cave, he took a samadhi there and declared that nobody will touch this jungle, nobody will break a twig from this jungle, and this is protected. So this is a sacred forest. But let me tell you one unfortunate thing. Whatever you see here is sold. This whole land is not declared as forest. It is sold to private builders, and all the standing plants, they're major, I think 90+% is one species. And that one species is Anogeisys pendula, or the dhaw, which is the title of today's talk. It is dhaw, Anogeisys pendula. Anogeisys is the genus of the family from which comes your Arjun, Baheda, it's the same family. And here, this is again Mangarbani at a different time. And you can see the color changing of the leaves of dhaw. Here you can see dhaw color changing. But this particular tree is called Boswellia serrata, or the salai tree. This is another dhaw forest. Here you can see very clearly dhaw in winter months when it has shed its leaves, and it looks just gorgeous. I mean, of course, our jungles are not green always. In fact, most of our deciduous forests are green for a very short time. Our jungles are browns and yellows and sometimes green, maybe in a year, about 6 months it is green, but other times it's yellow, it's brown, it's, very gray. Doesn't mean that it doesn't have good biodiversity. This is Mangarbani again, and we have at least a pair of leopard. Here we have jackals, we have striped hyena, we have porcupines, lots of porcupines. We have snakes of all kinds, good diversity of birds, close to 400 species reported. And in the valley, you have different flora. Now, since we are talking about biological diversity, it is important to understand how even a small niche has a different profile of plants. Yeah. So here on the top is the Boswellia serrata, which I am calling salai here. This is the salai on the top. If you can look, this is a gum tree which has, in the market there is a product called Loban, which comes from this tree. Very promising tree. It has the gum is used in the market. It's also medicinally used for arthritis, and a very promising results it's showing in cancer treatment. Then this dense green is something called Ficus mollis. Now, let me tell you that, if rain falls here, there is no way that rain penetrates, and, there is very little moisture that stays there. Everything runs off. So you have this ficus. Ficus is the same genus as your people, as your bud, as your pilkan. Yeah, so this is Ficus mollis. It loves to be on the hill slopes. Then you have dhaw at the base. Then this is what I was talking to you about was the hilly forest. Now, not everything is on the hills. In the valleys also you have forest, and the forest of the valleys are very different. Here you have, I'm sure some of you can guess, it is Butea monosperma, or the dhak, or tesu, or palash. This is a palash forest patch with lots of other diverse species such as phoenix or jungli khajur, chilbil, which is Holatilia, integrifolia, to Eritia, chamrod, and many others, So this is on the hill slopes, you have dhok. On the hilltops, you have salai, which is Boswellia serrata. Dhok is the dhaw. And then you have dhak, Khajur, Chamro, Chilbil, Kem jungle. Now in the Aravallis, why I'm telling you all of this, because this is what was our inspiration when we are trying to bring the forests of Aravallis into that small 380 acres. These were the different forests we traveled, we studied, we understood, we kind of made meticulous notes of, and that's what we wanted to revive in that patch. Now in the Aravallis, you also have a lot of piling up of sand. You know, there are, since last 12,000 years, there has been a movement of sand from the Thar. Our Thar desert is not very old, you know, perhaps it's only 12,000 years old. And there is this movement of sand that is happening over the years, and that sand is checked by the Aravallis. And that piles up on the southern and the western part of the Aravallis. But when you look at the flora, when you look at the plant diversity, you will see that the plants that grow on the hilltops are so different from what they grow, what happens on the sandy dunes. You know, the sandy flora is very different. I mean, I would love to talk about what is the difference in it. If any of you are interested, or some of you are interested, I would love to talk to you about what detailed characteristic of it. This is a very denuded Aravalli. You can see, you know, not much vegetation on it. Unfortunately, most part of the Aravalli is like that. There is so much human pressure, you know, and regeneration is very difficult, because once you take away the native vegetation, then the elements, because of the harshness of climate, less rainfall, we have very poor rainfall in Aravallis, and you don't see so much of regeneration, you know. So the whole notion of leaving Aravallis and it will heal itself will take really long time, and it will go through succession, and it will go through all the invasions of the alien species, which is the counter. You have to undertake the operation of restoration. This is a friend Golak's interpretation of this 380 acres, what we call as Aravalli Biodiversity Park. And here we have kind of tried to place the different kinds of forest that I was mentioning to you, Dhak forest, or the Babul forest, or the Salai forest, or the Dhaw forest, in different terrains. You know, I can go into it because like this is a Dhaw forest that we wanted to create on this hill. And that's the valley where we had a Babul forest. This is again a Dhaw forest on the top. This is the Kadam forest on the valley. This is again a Dhaw forest here, here, here. And then you have a Dhak forest here. Then you have grasslands and sacrum grasslands in between. I'm sorry, maybe you are not making out with my cursor. Here, I have to tell you that I wish it was easy to restore wildlands, you know. It is easy, but it is not that easy as well. You know, it's not that easy that you go to a nursery, say, okay, 10 पौधे ये वाले दो, 20 पौधे ये वाले दो, 1000 ये दो, 2000 ये दो, और जाके plant कर लो. It is not like that. See, you have to make detailed list of what kind of plants do you want in a landscape, in the different composition that you want. Like a Dhaw forest, as I mentioned to you earlier, 90% will be Dhaw. The rest 10% will be different kinds of other species. But the dominant species is Dhaw. Now, when you go to a forest nursery, or when you go to a private nursery and you ask them, कि भाई हमें Dhaw का पेड़ चाहिए. And we went to several of forest nurseries in Punjab, in Haryana, in Delhi, in Gujarat, in Rajasthan. We did not find Dhaw plants, because nobody, forest department in its own wisdom, does not grow Dhaw trees. And when you ask them why, because their answer is that Dhaw is a very slow growing tree. It is eaten by cattle and the wildlife, therefore we don't grow it. So what do they grow in the forest nursery? There are only 5 or 6 species that they believe are not eaten by wildlife, not eaten by cattle, grows fast, and that's what they promote. And when you look at when you examine those 5, 6 species, you realize they are exotic plants. They are mostly exotic plants, because exotic plants, Indian animals or Indian cattle have no taste for these exotic plants, and so they are not eaten. Or there are some plants which are toxic, because they are toxic to the animals, they don't eat. those plants. So that's what forest department promote. It does not promote habitat creation. It just goes on planting species which are toxic or not conducive for the restoration work. It is very unfortunate when you go to a forest nursery in the of the forest department, and the private nurseries. Private nurseries, of course, are there only to make money. So they grow what sells in the market, but they don't grow forest species. So unfortunately, looking into these states, going to the forest nursery, we realized that maximum we can get is about 20 species. And that was not good enough, because in our endeavor of creating this forest, we wanted, like in Mangarbani, when we did the flora survey in 2011, 12, and 13, we got close to 250 species of plants in one season. So in monsoon, then you get many herbaceous plants that come up and then they die out. When winters, you get another set of plants which come and then go. Then there are various kinds of ferns, orchids that come up. So if you make a list, you would get easily 300 plus species. But in the park, in the restored area that we wanted to restore, we wanted to add close to 200 species that would give the true character of the Aravali forests, and in different forest types. So we had no option but to create our own nursery. And we started creating our own nursery. Now, it is not easy to create a nursery, because what it means is that you have to collect seeds. Now, you have to collect seeds of 200 kinds of different plants. Now, all those plants are not available, they're not easily available in the landscape. You have to go to Sariska, you have to go to Madhav National Park, you have to go to, outskirts of buffer zones of Ranthambore or Kota, or where Udaipur, Kumbhalgarh, to get the seeds. Because it's not easy that, okay, you have noticed a jungle tree and then you say, okay, I want to get the seeds. I'll tell you an example where we were looking for Kulu, which is called ghost tree. It's fruits. So I had made a friend with a forest guard, and I called him up. I went to the forest, Madhav National Park, and I told him that, whenever the fruits of Kulu ripen, you have to give me a call. Of course, he wouldn't call me, so I would call him, keep a tab. I would say, has it started flowering? Because I had a record of when it flowers, when it fruits. So I say, has it started flowering? He would say, yes, it has started flowering. Then I said, okay, the flowers have now shed. Can you see the fruits emerging? He said, yeah, fruit is emerging. Now they are ripening. Now they have ripened. Now you come. It is all ripe. Please come. And when you go there and when you look at the trees, there is no fruit. He says, oh, kya bataएं, ये यहाँ पे एक बड़ा बंदर का troop आया और उसने सारे fruits खा लिए. And you are left with nothing, So that happened multiple times when you went to the jungle and you came empty-handed without any seeds. So it's not easy to collect seeds, forest seeds. And then to germinate them is another story, because there is not enough information available to us on germination of these species. But over time, we were able to grow big, have a big bank of seeds. From first year, I remember we germinated close to 35 species. Then we did 58, then we did 80 plus, then we did 110, 160. And today we have added close to 200 species to the park. Now, once you have grown the plants in your nursery, now how do you plant them? So the planting was done with imitating what nature has taught us in our travels in the Aravalis. We did extensive travel in the Aravalis. We made meticulous notes on the Aravalis as to what grows where, what are the shrubs growing, what are the, on the hilltops, what is growing, why it is growing, what, all the characters were kind of understood, and we kind of imitated that in our landscape, and we started planting up. Now, this is a very, very interesting thing that IIM Gurgaon did, which was the next step. Next step was to involve the whole of city. They announced publicly, they invited all walks of life, people from all walks of life, children, school children, corporates, normal citizen to come and plant. And that's what happened, Over the last 8 years, we planted 1,15,000 plants, from trees to shrubs to climbers to climbers. We planted all of that and created this beautiful place. Now, it was not just merely planting out. It was it was an opportunity for us to teach children as to what are they planting, why they're planting, what are these species, why they are unique, and all of that. Yeah. Even the corporates who were sponsoring planting work were taught about planting, about plants, about what is the right way, what is it that we are doing collectively, and how they are influencing this city. You know, the message of forest creation was sent across to all the corporates, 70 corporate partners who came and participated. It was sent to the school children, and it was sent to everybody who came and planted. Then we also tried different methods. We tried seed ball propagation, we seed broadcasting, seedling through scraping the surface and planting it out. You know, various methodologies we employed to plant this up. Now, as a result, what you're seeing now, as you can see Quartzite Hill I've been talking about, and you can see Boswellia Salai forest coming up on top of it. Can you imagine on a rocky outcrop? These plants, they are only 4 years old and they are about 10 feet tall. I mean, people ask me as to, you know, you don't need soil. So I remember a story, DLF, one of the engineers from DLF came and they said, why don't you put, we'll give you 300 truckloads of mitti, and why don't you put that on the rocky outcrop and plant trees? And I laughed at him. I said, our jungles are telling a different story. Our jungles are telling us that what grows on the rocks will grow on the rock. You know, even if you create a layer of 2 feet of mud, it is not going to help, because the species that grows on the rock will grow on the rock. And so Boswellia kind of surprised us. It surprised us so much that, you know, on the rock, it doesn't need much water. Quartzite has cracks in the whole rock structure, and the moisture is trapped there, and that's what the plant uses. So I'll give you some of the examples how things changed over time. And if you look here, here you can see that most of the plants are Prosopis juliflora, or the Vilaiti kikar I was mentioning about. This is the mining pit. You can see the mining scars. And you can see the banding of quartzite. Now this is a typical banding that will happen when the sandstone over time kind of gets lifted, and then it goes through the metamorphic process and becomes a band like this. Yeah. Here, when we remove the Prosopis juliflora, the native vegetation started to show up. We planted up Babool forest, and on the base, if you remember in that particular map, I told you about the Haw forest on top and the Babool forest at the base, and this is that very site. Water gets collected in the monsoon and then it disappears. So this is after 4 years of restoration work, and this is after 7 years of restoration work. You can see the Babool forest coming up nicely. This is last year, November. You can see plants coming up, and then on the top, the Haw forest has come up. And the Haw here is growing up to 7 feet tall. And Salai forest, which is on the edge, on the brow of the hill, is also come up very nicely. Another example here, I'm going to show you about this water body. There are many, many seasonal water bodies that happen in the landscape. In the Aravallis, you can see this is a seasonal water body, and we dredged it in 2010. Then you can see lots of Prosopis juliflora, you know, the Vilaiti kikar, the alien invasive species. We removed that. And what we get is again, you know, a jungle coming up. This is a nice diverse forest of Anogeisys pendula or Dhaw that is coming up in the valley. You have a different kind of forest from Kadam to Haldu that you can get here. And this is after 7 years of work in that particular forest. So you can see, you can see this ghost tree, you can see the salai, you can see tamarix, you can see, and on the hilltop is the Dhaw forest. Another example, how the land transformed, how the land healed itself. This is an amphitheater, and you're looking from amphitheater to a hill called It's a Salai forest now, and you can see in 2010 there is Prosopis juliflora or the Vilayati kikar, and there are grasses, and this is what it has transformed into. On the top there is Salai forest, and on the base there is Dhau, Ronj, and Dhak forest. Another example of a mining pit, you can see the mining pit here, and the vegetation is a little bit of saccharum. This is a grass from the same genus as our sugarcane, and this is Prosopis juliflora again, and you can see the valley transformed. This is after 6 years of work. This is something called Titar Chowk. Here we are, Titar Chowk, and here you can see the Titar Chowk, revegetated. So what happened when we brought in the 8 kinds of forests that we see in Aravallis in this 380 acres? You saw a thriving wildlife. You saw birds kind of using the area much better. You could see the densities and the populations of fauna and lots of wildlife events. And you can also see reptiles and snakes. Now, as of today, we have 195 species of birds reported from the park. For a landscape, for a habitat which is only 380 acres with no permanent water body, this is a huge number. This is really a big number. Take my words for it, for the bird diversity. But you also saw a lot of wildlife events. You have, in terms of wildlife, now we have nilgai, we have jackal, we have jungle cat, we have civets, porcupines, monitor lizards, mongoose, snakes of all kinds, from saw-scale vipers to Russell viper to krait to cobras to sand boas and many other snakes. Yeah, wool snakes and trinkets and all of that. Somebody called Misha Bansal, a student from JNU, she did a study on looking at the biodiversity, looking at the bird diversity, their populations versus park versus a restored park versus an unrestored area. So unrestored is the Prosopis or Vilayati kikar jungle, and the restored was the Aravalli Biodiversity Park. The graphs show you very clearly as to in the restored site, there was often 3 times to 4 times more density and population count. We introduced many species which are rare or endangered in Haryana. Some Haryana has lost, are extinct in Haryana. These are some of the species that we saw that we have revived in the park. So in many ways, this is a hotspot, biodiversity hotspot that has come up in time. For me, I think personally, I think it's a nursery of ideas for restoration of biodiversity in our semi-arid landscapes. These are different plants that you can see. I mean, I can go into the names of plants, but I think it's just a visual delight in different seasons that you can come across different kinds of flowering and different kinds of events of pollination, seed dispersal, predation, all that happens in the jungle of Aravalli Biodiversity Park. As a result, what you can see is this place has become an educational space. Many university students come here, they learn about the flora, avifauna, fauna, insects life, amphibian life. Many do research on different life forms, including plants. It has also become a birding hotspot. It's it's visited by all kinds of birders and bird researchers. We also give an opportunity for corporates and the citizen to come and participate in the nursery activities. And we also do lots of nature trails and programs for the citizen. This is a Dhau forest. You can see how the Dhau forest is emerging. And these are, can you believe this is only 7 years with no water, almost no water to support this vegetation. It's beautifully coming up nicely. This is the Dhau plant that I was talking about in a different season. And it's a delight to go to a Dhau forest. In terms of amphibians also, Dr. Robin Suyesh did a study and he found all the 8 species of frogs in the park. He says, according to him, he has not got one spot where he would have, where he found all the 8 species of amphibians together. This is an amphitheater within the park. You can see how the forest of Dhau and Salai coming up. Now, a restoration work is incomplete if you don't see the succession happening, if you don't see the new recruitment of the wild species happening. And this is very beautiful image for me, because it's an image of hope. Here you can see that this is Salai plant, which is coming out, and Salai seedling, the Boswellia serrata seedling, coming out of rocks, giving us hope that even if we don't remain, this jungle is going to remain. So this is a Boswellia plant, and this is the rocky outcrop where you can see these little seedlings emerging, giving us hope. And here, this is these are the kind of interpretation that we are trying to look at. There are a lot of bird activities that are happening. This is a Baya weaver on the right, throwing open its nest that it has made for the female to come and inspect. Now this is what the jungle looks in last year, post monsoon around October. This is how the jungle looked. That's our nursery here, and that's Delhi. And that's all Vilayati Kikar, the alien invasive. On this patch, this is the Dhau forest on top. This is the Babul forest under it. And that's a mixed deciduous forest here. This is the Dhau forest again on top. This is the Babul forest that you can see. These are the sacrum, Phoenix sacrum grasslands that you find, savannas that you find in this part of the country. These are different strata of plants. This is the ghost tree, and that's the pathway that was under construction. Now look at the vegetation around that construction. If I recall, I would request you to recall the picture of those women carrying loads of material, earth material, and here this jungle has taken shape. And there was a road which was being planned to work as a link road, and this would have destroyed the whole park. And we just announced people and citizens came to protect the land, because they were the ones who created this jungle, and they they took over and they said that we won't let this forest to die because of a road network. And it gave us an opportunity to educate about what we have done over the years. And children came, thousands of children came, and they fought. They wrote to the chief minister and other people. Excuse me. So this is what the park looks in relation to the modern city of Gurugram. And I am very positive. A lot is possible. A city which represents consumerism, a city which represents the top corporate organizations being there, a city which represents high rises, a city which is a model of consumption, has welcomed a forest, a Aravali forest, a forest which is not unique in many ways. It's not a tropical rainforest. It's an Aravali forest, which is in nobody's radar. Has welcomed this kind of a forest into its heart and kind of accepted it. I think a lot is possible, and that's the message that I want to give. It has been an immense journey. It's a beautiful journey for me over the last 10 years to work on this land, to get the seedlings from the jungles, to grow those tiny dhaws. We have planted dhaw of this size into the landscape, and hoping that they grow. And next season when we came, they were eaten up by the nilgai. And, so a dhaw takes its time. It's so resilient. It is very resilient. It is eaten up to 1 inch left. And yet in the next season, you will see as soon as the monsoon comes, a new leaf comes out. It shows us the strength of the plant. It needs just protection from us, and it grows back into a jungle. And that's the message I want to convey to you. Thank you very much for listening to me on this rewilding journey that I had with this beautiful team of I Am Gurgaon. It was really, I'm a changed person after this whole experience. And I hope we all get such opportunities to do something something that we love to do and something to contribute to the overall well-being of humanity and the biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. We were all listening to you with rapt attention, and I'm sure we've learned a lot. I would also like to tell you that 2 years ago, we from Haritkram actually undertook a trip to Aravali Biodiversity Park, and all that you were talking about makes so much more sense now. You know, we've had the practical exposure there, and we've now got to listen to you. We've really been very fortunate. I think without wasting a lot of time, I would want to start taking up questions because there are innumerable questions waiting for you.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd like to start with the first one. This is from a colleague, Dr. Swati Rajput. She's from the Geography Department of Shahid Bhagat Singh College.
Okay.
Her question is, she says cities and urbanization have remained the priorities for governmental authorities. As a result, forests and agricultural land suffer. How do you think it is possible to plan green and concrete together? And what should be an ideal city? Also, how do you plan green spaces in cities?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question. Sorry, my throat is parched. It's a very important question because that's what the world is facing as a big challenge. You know, as to how do we kind of bridge the biodiversity, which includes green spaces, and the city. I think one of the things that we have to understand in humanity as civilization is to appreciate and acknowledge that we cannot live in an island. We have to integrate wild into our life. We have to integrate green into our life. We cannot live in this isolation that we have been trained over last maybe at least 200 years. The whole modernization was based on a sanitization model, which is that, okay, remove wild, jungle, anything wild is not good for you. You have to stay away from it. I think we have to, there is a need to change that paradigm. And we have to respect our greenery. We have to respect our biodiversity. We have to, the planning cannot be only for cities. The planning has to be for larger landscape, you know, like a landscape, whether it is the agroclimatic zone level planning, where you look at cities in totality of the landscape, in a larger landscape, where cities are looked. So cities are part of the larger landscape and not just an island onto themselves, you know. So it's a larger question. We have been trying to work with the city municipalities to plant native species, to create green corridors, you know, to have native plants so that birds and bees and butterflies, they live together, and the faunal population, they live in that. Urban ecology is an emerging discipline, and it has to be respected. It has to be kind of open, with open arms, have to be integrated into our city planning. I mean, I can go into the details of it. We can have a one-on-one on it, because it's a new area. It's not a very charted area, you know, in terms of what can be done and what should be done.
Okay, thank you so much. We move over to the next question. This is from another colleague, Ankur Srivastav, again from the Geography Department. He says, I doubt that the Aravalis are performing ecological functions to its fullest. Apart from mining and construction activities, what are the other constraints faced by these forest ranges? And in line with this question, we have another question from a student, Arka Prabha Haldar. He says, so you've been able to reforest this land. He says, is IIM Gurgaon also planning to restore biodiversity to areas near the biodiversity park that might still be undertaking illegal mining? And also, are you planning to extend the limit of operation for the sake of welfare of the environment beyond Gurgaon?
So let me tell you, I mean, this is a very good question. I think I would like to, go on to that question which the faculty member has asked about geography faculty, about function of Aravalis, you know, ecological functions, ecological services that Aravalis play. So if you look at Aravali's, see, the hill landscape is just part of what we see as Aravali. All the agricultural land is a byproduct of Aravali. You know, you cannot exclude the hilltop as Aravali and not include the larger landscape as Aravali, because that drainage has created the larger landscape. You know, so whether it is the plains of Gurgaon or plains of Faridabad, or the channeling of Yamuna, is all governed by Aravalis. You know, it's because the substrata is the Aravalis. Yeah. So the ecological function is very clear. I mean, Aravalis hills have a potential of 20 lakh liters of water recharged, 20 lakh liter per hectare. That's the capacity of Aravalis. Even if you take one parameter of water, I think Aravalis are worth, you know, the ecological services that anything can provide. Other than that, you have our pollution sinks to biodiversity, biodiversity sinks, to carbon sequestering sinks. I think Aravalis play immense role. And drainage and the precipitation. You know, if you have good jungles of Aravalis, we have been decimating the forests of Aravali, but Aravalis have very good forests. Look at the Mangarmani forest. I mean, I showed you the picture. It's beautiful. I mean, the temperature is 5 degrees down when you are coming from Gurgaon to the Mangarmani forest straight. I mean, I'm not even talking about going into the valley where the temperature will be much lower, but straight on the hilltop, the temperature variation will be 5 degrees. So it plays an immense role. I mean, if there is any specific question to ask about this, the groundwater recharge is very, very important. I think all the cracks in the Aravalis let the water seep in and then release it into the larger catchment. All that larger catchment that you see in Mewat or Haryana or down in Rajasthan is because of the Aravalis. Yeah. So, and in terms of IIM Gurgaon, the NGO IIM Gurgaon is doing is wherever it can work, and most of its projects are with the government, municipality or forest department or GMDA to work. And wherever opportunities arise, we have created something called Sikandarpur watershed that we are trying to revive, 60 hectares. There is Badshahpur Nala, which was a tributary of Saibi River. We are working on that and creating a Nala forest. Similarly, we are doing, basically our agency and our expertise in creating forest of a certain kind in the larger Aravali landscape. And that's what we are doing. There is Wazirabad Chakarpur Bandh, that was a forest embankment that used to protect the agriculture field from runoff from the Aravalis. That we have restored, have made into a mobility corridor, all using native species, so that it becomes a corridor forest for birds and animals to be used. Yeah.
Okay, sir, I think you've already answered another question that we got. I looked at it later. This question says, since mining areas are very difficult to restore, do you think it is just a lack of political will, or are there other biogeographic reasons that make restoration difficult or impossible? And what are the real challenges in the restoration? If you would like to add anything to this. And also, can I please request you, sir, to stop your screen sharing now?
Okay.
This question was from Prasanna.
Okay, great. So, so I'll address mining. See, mining in our country, our policies of mining are very strange. Let me, at the outset, let me tell you that restoring a mine is not easy. Our mine was not a very severe mine. You know, if it was a granite mine, we would be, you know, it would need a different methodology to restore a granite mine, or to restore a limestone mine. You know, it's a very different mine that you are looking at. When you look at a granite mine or a marble mine, what do? They cut clean the sides, you know, because every inch is precious. Every inch of granite or marble is precious. So they cut it clean and let the let the, and take out the maximum material from that mine. And often you will find that they have gone all the way exposing the groundwater. And that becomes very difficult, because once the groundwater is exposed, then you have not much to reclaim, Then you have to do physical methods of filling it up with all the tail ends that are there in mining tail ends, and then restore it, which is a longer process. Now, having said that, the policy of mining is such that you have to restore. In our country, any mine lease is given with a condition that you have to restore the mine. But the leases are for 100 years, mind you that. So if a mine is for 100 years, I mean, you're not going to see, I'm not going to see if that mine is going to be restored, because there is always a scope for you to extract something. It might be a marble mine, but because there are other rocks, you will start mining quartzite from that rock, or whatever base rock there is available there. So it is a very tricky situation, and there is dearth of proper policy in terms of restoration of mines. It's very clear. Fortunately, in Haryana, mining has stopped. In northern Aravalli, mining has stopped, and like Alwar, there is whatever mining is happening is illegal mining and not a legal mining. So that can be curtailed and contained. Wherever there is a legal mine, I think they'll have a very particular restoration methodology. And I have no experience of working on a granite mine or a limestone mine. I would love to work on one of those, but I have no experience how to go about doing that.
Okay, thank you, sir. There's a question from one of our ex-students and alumnus, Kritika Khandelwal. She was also associated with Haritkram for a couple of years. So she says, working alongside corporates allows us to restore our biodiversity. But the cycle starts with the apathy of such corporates when they destroy forests tirelessly for their own profits. What are your thoughts on the importance of social action against this exploitation, and how to actually stop this cycle?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. Very interesting question by Kritika. See, it's unfortunately, that's a reality we live in. Our world, look at my room or whatever I consume, that comes from exploitation of land or forests, and corporates are nothing but instruments in providing that and making profit in return, and that's the whole mechanism we have lived with. So blaming is not going to yield us anything. Corporates are there to make money. Now, it is the responsibility of the government. I think it is the responsibility of us and the government, because us as policy, somebody who can influence policy, we should see that the government comes up with a good policy, and which has clause, which has penal action possible. Excuse me. Which has penal action possible, and then you see, mining is important. For instance, if you blame corporate, government is also mining. We have our own government mines, so we cannot blame corporates for it. They are just representative of our greed, of our exploitation. They are agency by which we kind of, what is it called? We actualize the greed, that collective social greed. So the problem is of our collective. Our problem is of our collective want, desire, more and more desire. Our quality of life 50 years ago, 30 years ago, even 30 years ago, a phone was not a necessity. Phone was a luxury. Now, mobile phone is not even a luxury, it's a necessity. It's a necessity. So how consumption patterns have changed over time, So the social action is that we look at the larger picture as to what we have done because of our collective greed, which is not the responsibility of corporates. I'm again telling you again and again, because they are symptoms. They are symptoms. They are only symptoms. Disease is us. There are no other individuals, They are some baniyas or some person who is wanting to make money out of it, but it's our collective greed that they are facilitating, you know. So we want more resources. I want best of the computers. I want best of the technology. I want the chipsets. I want, you know, in my devices, GPS and all of that. And if there are a lakh people like me who want this material, obviously a corporate will find niche in it and try to take it out, you know, and find avenues. So it's us who have to make policy right, so that we kind of look at the projections, we look at how much is good enough and how much is detrimental for the earth, and draw lines, strict lines there, that okay, not more than this. If it is going to be more than this, then there you know, there is no way tracking back, you know. Like the air pollution, what has been done to our air pollution? Now you can't live without cars, you can't live without transportation, and you can't live with this polluted air. You know, it's a catch-22 situation. But the social action is by looking at the true problem, and the true problem is our collective greed, our collective want for more.
Okay, this is a question from a student member, Sarthak Jain. He says, how can small enterprises help in continuous growth of biodiversity, especially those related to the travel industry?
How are they? I don't know. I think travel industry has played a very important role, both in terms of decimating and in terms of reviving, both. Earlier it was decimating, because look at the kind of travel people are doing now. It's all the jungle landscapes are being covered by people. You know, now hotels are coming up. There are, you know, it's a nexus of, nexus is the wrong word. It's a relationship between resorts, hotels, and the travel agencies. And the travel and tourism businesses, they are a business in their own right. And they make people who live in cities or other places, to access the wilderness. And this has also resulted in exposure of land. For instance, the lands which were not, like, if you look at Panna Tiger Reserve, or if you look at Kanan Tiger Reserve, the lands, there were wilderness lands. A lot of land was wilderness, you know. But more and more people are buying land, colonizing them, making them into resorts. Look at Corbett, what has happened to Corbett. Look at what has happened to Rishikesh, Mussoorie, Dehradun. You know, a lot of, I mean, forget about Mussoorie, Dehradun. Look at Rishikesh and look at Corbett, you know. There are stretch of Ramganga are full of hotels, you know. And it's a pity when you look at that. But there are also positives that, you know, it's an imperative. Traveling is imperative because we have resources, we have fossil fuel power, and so people will go. So sustainable tourism plays an important role. That okay, how do you send a message which is right? That okay, can we be less conservative? Can we look at place which is sensitive about its local biodiversity, about its consumption of resources? If we don't need ACs in Corbett or other places, we don't need, you know, exotic foods that come from Delhi or imported from abroad and served you to some remote location in Ladakh or in Uttarakhand or in rainforest in some other part of the country. So all those measures have to be looked into. But unfortunately, it's guided by money, and money is very, very weird, because you know, you are into service industry, and service has taken a different form. Service means what people want. It's not about what is made to appreciate. You know, when you go to Corbett, you are not going for the simplicity of the landscape. You're going there for parties. People are going there for New Year's. People are going there for celebration. You know, marriages are happening in Corbett National Park. So which is detrimental from a travel tourism point of view, and the natural landscape and the whole biodiversity there. But it can be, the same tourism can be geared towards sustainable ways of living, appreciating city people, appreciating what it means to live in a village, what it means to live in a jungle, you know, with bare minimum facilities available to them. Sorry, these are all becoming long answers because I don't have answers to them. I'm as lay a person as you are, perhaps, and but this is from my experience that I'm sharing.
Okay, so we'll get back to your primary area of work, which is the biodiversity park. So Shreyan, a student member, has a plethora of questions, but I'll just try to summarize him. His first question was on the invasive species. He says, since we now know about the negative impact on biodiversity, what are the possible ways in which we can detect these invasive species and create awareness amongst the people? And also, at the same time, how can we get rid of them without actually uprooting them from their native regions? There's another question that he had. He says, how many months of research did it require for you to actually start work on the biodiversity project?
So I'll answer the second question, which is easier. So before the Aravali Biodiversity Park, I was working with on the Sundar Nursery project. So I had already worked 3 years on Aravali landscape and had documented or traveled into the Aravali looking at the flora maps and flora identified. We have already done the identification of flora of Sariska and Mangarbani, Mandi, and various other landscape in and around Delhi. So, but it's a continuous journey. Yeah? It's a continuous journey every year. Like when we did Mangarbani flora, we were surprised by one tree called Hymenodictyon excelsum or Bhormal. It's not recorded in the Northern Aravallis. Was found in one whole valley. One whole valley had this tree, which you either find in Rajaji National Park or Corbett, or you find in the Central Indian jungles or in Udaipur side. You don't find in between, you know. So we discovered this tree and it was a good addition to our flora. Then we had another hibiscus hirsutis, which was again an addition to our area. Then there are ferns which gets added, and many, you know. So it is a journey. It's not a journey which ends like that, but it was good enough to start. So I think those 3 years of working in Sundar Nursery gave me a background to work on it, and then exploration of the jungles. As I said, 200 plus species. You go to Mangarbani, you will get 200 species. If you go to Sariska, you will get another 200 plus species. So it's easy to, you know, I think I was confident when I took it on in 2011. I was very confident that we can grow a nursery. We can grow all these plants in our nursery, which came from 3 years of experience in Sundar Nursery. And then you made your mistakes and you learn from those mistakes, and year on year you added species to the park. Yeah. So am I confident enough to do another biodiversity park in much shorter time? Yes, I can say that. Yes, I'm more confident, much at ease, much confident as to how to get seeds, how to grow them, and how to then propagate them much better. I can say for that. We have made many mistakes. We have learned from those mistakes. Maybe they were very, very important for us to make so that we learned and became more efficient with time. So that's the second answer. The first question was about, I'm forgetting, what is the first question?
It was about invasive species and
invasive
how to
species,
identify them.
yes. So invasive species, there is a list of invasive species in our subcontinent. If you can Google, you will find there are invasive trees, there are invasive shrubs, invasive grasses, invasive herbaceous flora. For different climatic regions, there are different invasive plants. For the Himalayan temperate to subtropical forest, there are different invasive plants. There are, for the arid zones, there are different invasive plants. For the moist forest, there are different invasive plants. So there are various categories of invasive plants. In our Delhi kind of a climate, the invasive that are prominent, that is Prosopis juliflora or the Vilayati kikar. Then there is Acacia tortilis, which is another prominent invasive. Then you have Leucaena leucocephala, which was brought in as a fodder, but has become invasive, are now invading the forest landscape of India. I think in the tree species, these are the 3 more important tree species that are exotic. There are also native invasives, you know, the species which are not from that particular Aravali landscape, but come out from other places and become invasive. So like neem is an invasive in our dry part of landscape. We don't detest it, we don't remove them, but it is colonizing now. Similarly, we have Marod Fali, which is called Haplophragma Fernando. is from Assam, that has kind of taken over many of the wild lands in this country, in our part of semi-arid landscape. There are shrubs which are exotic, such as Verbena, such as Lantana camera, which are very, very invasive. Xanthiums, which is another very invasive. Then there are climbers, which is plugarias and all of that. So there are many, many, yeah. There are grasses also. How do you uproot? How do you deal with invasives? Forest Department, in its own wisdom, spends crores of rupees in particular landscape. Like in Corbett, they spend crores of rupees just to get rid of Lantana camera, you know, and they try to uproot it. Then they subcontract it to a contractor who goes and chops the Lantana, and then it comes back again. So, so our methodology has to be right. There are many, many experiments on Lantana, but they have not been very, very successful because the vector is the bird. The birds love the berries. The bears love the berries. The civets love the berries. The jackals love the berries. You know, all the herbaceous, all the herbivores, they love the berries. So they carry the seed and disperse it in the other regions. So it's not very easy. You know, our biological methods work sometimes, but not necessarily they work for all the species. But there are many experiments that are going on, like in Prosopis juliflora, people are trying to curtail the branches and grow in between other species and let the other species to take over. Those are still at an experimental stage. There are also competition that you try to promote, like there are studies in Wayanad where Helictris isora versus Lantana camera are pitched together, and you have seen over a certain time, Lantana is being overtaken by Helictris isora. So it's a complex subject. It's not, I wish it was so simple that somebody could give you that this is the answer, now follow it, you know. So it is all species specific, it is all region specific, and one has to keep on doing trial and error methods. Until then, you will have no option but to uproot and try out, unless you're looking for a large long-term studies where you are looking at 100, 200 years succession. And many of these invasives will become part of the natural system, and then then they won't be so much invasive because other plants will try to live with them. You know, right now what happens in Prosopis juliflora, it has something called allelopathy, which is secreting alkaloids from its root zone and dissuading other seedlings to germinate. So it doesn't let other seedlings to grow. So all this needs study, all this needs more research, and all students can do such remarkable studies in the jungles of Indian subcontinent, and restoration work especially.
Okay, that was very, very informative, sir. There is a kind of a question from two people, similar question. One is from Dr. Anupama Hasija. She is a colleague from the Department of Geography in Shahid Bhagat Singh Evening College. So first of all, she appreciates your talk a lot. And then she wanted to know if your NGO is supported by some central or state government body.
All our projects are with the government. So this Aravali Biodiversity Park is a collaboration with Municipal Corporation of Gurgaon. So they are not funded by municipal, like all the civil works were done by Municipal Corporation. Boundary wall, the security is all done by Municipal Corporation. Only the funding of planting was done by corporates. So it's a collaboration with the municipal body. Then there is another project which is Sikandarpur watershed and watershed restoration work is in collaboration with something called GMDA, Gurgaon Metropolitan Development Agency, which is again an overarching body of government. So it's a collaboration with them. Then there's Wazirabad Chakarpur Bandh is a collaboration with Forest Department of Haryana. Then the Badshahpur Nana is again a collaboration with Municipal Corporation of Gurgaon. So they are all in collaboration. Yeah. What we want to do is we have created 12 plots, permanent plots of monitoring vegetation. We want to open it up for the researchers from the university, whether it is DU or JNU or TERI or any other university. And we want to have collaborations with them, that they come and do more research on restoration, on carbon sequestering, on relationship between animals, birds, insects, and vegetation, all of that. So that's the next level of collaboration we would want to go.
Sir, there was a question on sand deposition. So as you mentioned, Aravalli is protecting the city of Delhi from sand accumulation coming out of Thar Desert. How did you deal with the sand deposition in the western and southern part of Aravalli range during your rewilding journey?
You know, that I think you haven't understood that this is a natural phenomena which has been going on for last 12,000 years. Yeah. So when we say, you have to accept and acknowledge this fact that sand is blowing from the Thar Desert and is reaching out and going to the plains. So it's a good thing and a bad thing both, because sand from Sahara Desert goes all the way to Amazon forest, and it enhances the nutritive quality of Amazon forest. So we don't know this, you know, the whole complex structure that's in this Earth's structure, the close-knit relationships that we have between sand, water, elements, and all of that. We don't understand so much. But so it's not necessarily a bad thing. What is bad is when we don't want desertification, desertification is happening. And desertification is not happening because of natural phenomena. It's happening mainly because of human agency. Agriculture is largely responsible for the desertification that is happening. Twofold. One, agriculture, the pumping of groundwater. We are extracting so much groundwater. In the plains of Rajasthan, Haryana, and Punjab, and UP, we are extracting so much of groundwater that we are making that whole soil dead. And when the soil is dead, it becomes silt and it flies off. And it's washed off in the rain. And the larger particle is the sand. It's the quartzite grain that flows with the air if it is in smaller particle, and it gets accumulated over time. That's what a sand dune is. And so it's not one particular area that, okay, sand is flying and then reaching into the other parts. The desertification is happening all over. Punjab is almost a desert now. Northern Rajasthan is a desert now. Haryana, large part is a desert now, you know. And Aravalli is only a barrier which will check this silt and sand from flowing into another part of the landscape. But what happens is that you have already ruined it, because the water moisture regime in the soil is very important. Sand means that there is no moisture. There is no organic compound there, you know, there is no organic material there. It's only crystals of the grains of sand, you know, broken grains of sand, which is flying from here and there. So in our project, we haven't dealt with such a major problem. What we have seen, what I was trying to tell in my slideshow, is that sand is piling up, and the vegetation that you get on the sand is very different from what you get in the hills. And if you have to restore, if there is already a sand dune, we have a project in Jaipur where we have sand dunes, and we are restoring those sand dunes with the vegetation that you get in the sand dunes, which is mostly a shrubland. So you revive those shrublands, you revive those, you know, it doesn't become a woodland. It doesn't become a jungle of, you know, tall trees. It becomes a shrubland and a grassland. And that's what is the climax species over there.
Okay, sir, I'll just take two last questions because I can see you're also getting tired with all the speaking. So this is a question by Haritkram alumnus, Shubham Saket. He says the Great Green Wall initiative that has been proposed by the government alongside the Aravallis, will that just be about planting trees or creating a habitat as it is being undertaken by your team?
I'm not so sure about this plan. I'm not really sure. I haven't read enough about it, so I can't comment. But I hope it is not about planting, because planting is, as I mentioned, it's the habitat we need to first protect and then expand. So what we are doing, what we are in present disposition, what we are doing is that a lot of jungles are under threat. So habitat loss is a big problem. So we have to protect them. And the second step is to plant out and expand that habitat. So I don't know enough about it. So I hope I'll do some reading on it and understand, and perhaps we'll be able to answer that.
Okay, there's one last question by Madam Jyoti Varshini. And I'm sure this is a question that has been cropping up in everyone's minds too. So what is the role of biodiversities like the one in Aravalli in avoiding the pandemic like the present one?
Yeah, I mean, it will be just a guesswork because I'm not a virologist to understand and to comment on it. But what one hears and is that it's the forest that holds all the diversity together. So different forests hold different diversities, and we have to respect it. I think this particular coronavirus, COVID-19, has taught us is that we are fallible. You know, we all this while we were thinking that humans can go to Mars and live in Mars and all of that, we have come down on our knees begging that find solution for this misery. So it has humbled us down. I hope this humility remains and we understand that our whether it is water, whether it is rivers, oceans, or our jungles, they are sacrosanct and we have to protect them. And with that protection, we will get immunity and we will become stronger in our character and as well as in our relationship with them. I only hope that comes out. We become more aware and learn from this.
Okay.
Yeah. I also want to extend that those of you who want to volunteer with us, please either contact me or write to IIM Gurgaon, and you can all come and volunteer with us, you know, work on such interesting projects that we have, you know, whether it is one day you have, whether you have months you have, come work with us, learn on the job. If you have research inclination, help us do research, mapping the flora. You know, there's so many things that we can do together. You know, it's not just our project, it's a collective project of all of you. Please come and work with us and contribute in making our cities beautiful, meaningful.
Okay, there's just one more announcement I want to make. There are still a couple of questions that we could not take up because of paucity of time. So to all the participants who asked these questions, we'll be writing back to Dhasmana sir, and we expect to get back to you with the replies. With this, now I would like to call upon Jyoti Varshini ma'am to deliver a formal vote of thanks. Over to you, Jyoti ma'am.
Yeah, in fact, thank you, Komal. Sir, in fact, your talk has reminded me of one saying by Gandhi ji that there is enough for everyone's need, but not for the greed. So this is how it, seems like. And, it is really my privilege to be a part of this talk and thanking personality like you, sir. Thanks for taking us through this virtual, visually delightful walk through the Aravallis. We are on in our rooms, in our homes, and walking mentally through Aravallis through you. So it was really, really very interesting, very informative, and a very, very educative talk. As it seems from the interaction with the students, with the participants, they were all, even at this not so good time for a talk, they were all charged up. So thank you so much, sir. And the transformation that your work has brought into this park from a barren land, a barren huge field of about 400 acres to a beautiful, a park which is full of bird diversity, as you said, of about 200 species, the diversity of animals. It is just mind-blowing. In fact, I take this liberty in requesting our convener, our staff advisor, Dr. Raman, to take us back to Aravalli and to Mangarwani too.
Wow.
Maybe with your inputs, with your guidance, this will be a totally different nature trail this time. So thank you so much, sir. And at SPSC, at Bhagat Singh College, we wish that you continue to contribute to our environment, to our society, and keep inspiring people like us And our students like Shreyan, I'm sure he's already inspired. And thank you once again, sir, for taking out your time. This vote of thanks is incomplete if I don't mention our principal, sir, who's an avid nature lover himself. And for all Haritkram activities, he is always very supportive, very enthusiastic. Besides that, we at Haritkram have a team of guides and mentors with Dr. Neeta Hussain. Unfortunately, she could not make it today for some health issues. Dr. Shikha Gupta, our very interactive moderator, young faculty, Dr. Komal, and not to forget our extremely passionate and dedicated team of students with Dr. Raman as their, their mentor. I'm sure Dr. Raman breathes environment day in and day out, because even in these testing times, he could imagine, he could think of, coming up with this talk once again and holding this webinar. Thank you so much, everyone. And I really wish to express my sincere thanks to all the audience, all the participants for being so interactive and so patient in their listening. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Over to you, Komal, if you have to make any announcement. Or Raman, sir, if you want to say something.
Thank you, Vijay, sir. And as our principal mentioned, time should come that when we are able to invite you to the institution and to address a larger audience, wherein the students who are really enthusiastic can be there. And this, your talk has really put a mark for this biodiversity trail for the students to have their competitions and to reach the World Environment Day on June 5th, where another session on a panel discussion on biodiversity conservation can be taken up. Komal had taken up a series of questions, but I just would like to ask you one advice that on this current situation with the pandemic, how do you feel the environment enthusiasts can think on biodiversity and its conservation on being in lockdown?
Yeah, I think when they say, they often use this phrase, charity begins at home. I would say ecology begins at home too. So look around and you will look at the plants and the birds and the bees and the insects. I have been fortunate to, look at these things in my balcony, in my roadside. I've been able to appreciate it much more, because of this pandemic, that you have been locked down and you couldn't go out. So what you saw, you appreciated everything from the little flowers on tomatoes to chilies, to on chachindas, to little bees coming over, to ants, to moths and butterflies and whatnot, and the sunbirds and the tailor birds. The local ecology is what matters to you. So that I would put it simply that as it makes you aware that everything exists in your vicinity. So there is local ecology that we have to value and cherish. And based on this local ecology, there is a larger ecology that we have to influence and we have to respect. I think I would like to think that way.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And I request all participants to do keep visiting our society's website, haritkram.org, and we'll be updating all our future endeavors there. We'll be having our next meeting on June 5th for open to all participants. So I welcome you all and we keep a check on that. Thank you very much. Thanks for all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.